Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to completely reframe a pretty famous historical figure. We're stepping back into the 19th century to answer what is, honestly, a staggering question. How did a doctor, armed with literally nothing but a pen, manage to dismantle a sprawling 300-year-old empire? We're going to dive deep into the life, the travels, and the absolutely brilliant mind of Dr. Jose Rizal.
So to really understand this incredible feat, we can't just look at Rizal as a local revolutionary stuck on a single island. No, to really grasp his impact, we've got to view him as a global voyager. His ideas didn't just, appear out of thin air. They were heavily cross-pollinated through international maritime travel. He basically absorbed the world and then used it to change his home forever.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, The Awakening. Genius offers no protection.
We'll start our journey in the isolated Philippines under Spanish colonial rule. Rizal was born into a prosperous farming family in Calamba, Laguna, back in 1861, and right from the start, he was a verified polymath. He mastered multiple languages, excelled in the arts, and eventually studied medicine. But his worldview? It was abruptly shattered. In 1872, when he was just 11 years old, 3 reformist priests, historically known as the Gomburza, were executed by the Spanish government on entirely false charges of treason.
That devastating event proved a truly terrifying reality. Under absolute colonial rule, your genius or your compliance offered zero protection. You could be the smartest, most law-abiding citizen around, and the system could still just crush you. This realization was the spark, the real catalyst for his political awakening, driving him to seek answers far beyond the shores of the Philippines.
Moving right along to Section 2, the global classroom, Oceans of Influence. In 1882, Rizal boarded the steamship Salvadora, kicking off a decade of extensive global travel. And when he passed through the newly opened Suez Canal, which was this massive maritime choke point, he witnessed something profound. It was like night and day. He saw this stark contrast between Spain's archaic, almost medieval grip on his homeland and the rapid modernization happening in the British and French empires. He saw the gap, and he saw it clearly.
That exposure really fueled his work when he got to Europe. He studied medicine, philosophy, and languages in major intellectual hubs like Madrid, Paris, and Heidelberg. But he didn't just study. He organized. He joined the propaganda movement, which was a dedicated group of Filipino expatriates in Europe. They leveraged their international network to lobby the Spanish crown directly for equal rights, parliamentary representation, and the secularization of parishes.
So the main takeaway here is that Rizal was profoundly influenced by the global maritime trade network. His oceanic roots let him travel across Europe, the Americas, over to Japan, and to London. He's absorbing different models of governance, seeing industrialization firsthand, looking at human rights. This constant movement allowed him to cross-pollinate ideas with intellectuals all over the globe. It completely transformed him from a local student into a formidable international geopolitical thinker. Which brings us to Section 3, Weapons of Paper, the Intellectual Arsenal.
Now, Rizal fiercely believed in education and reform, not bloody revolution. So he chose to forge his ultimate weapons out of paper. In 1887, he published Noli me Tangere, or Touch Me Not. This was a devastating satirical exposé of the Spanish Catholic friars and the corrupt civil administration. Naturally, it was immediately banned, which, as you might guess, instantly made it a highly sought-after underground text. Then, 4 years later in 1891, he released Filibusterismo, a much darker, far more cynical sequel. This one explicitly explored the terrifying inevitability of violent revolution if peaceful reforms were just continually denied. Together, these books did exactly what he intended. They absolutely shattered the psychological hold Spain had on the Filipino populace.
Next up, Section 4, Exile as Proof, the Microsociety.
So, by 1892, Rizal returned to the Philippines knowing full well he was a marked man. He tried to found a peaceful civic organization, but the Spanish immediately arrested him and exiled him to the remote town of Dapitan. But here's the amazing part. Instead of letting exile break him, he turned it into his ultimate proof of concept. Over 4 years, he essentially built his own functioning microsociety. He constructed a waterworks system, opened a school, built a hospital, and even engaged in cutting-edge agricultural and biological research. He proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Filipinos were entirely capable of self-governance and progress without any Spanish oversight.
But now we're faced with a really tragic irony. How does a man who builds hospitals and schools, a man who fiercely advocates for peaceful reform, end up becoming the catalyst for an armed uprising?
Let's look at Section 5, the final sacrifice, the point of no return.
In 1896, desperate to leave his exile in Dapitan, Rizal volunteered to serve as a military doctor for the Spanish army in Cuba. And a fateful chain of events quickly unfolded. First, he boarded a ship bound for Spain. But while he was at sea, the Philippine Revolution, led by Andres Bonifacios Katipunan, finally exploded. The Spanish panicked and immediately scapegoated Rizal. They arrested him while he was still in transit, chained him up, and shipped him right back to Manila. And finally, despite having absolutely zero direct involvement in the armed rebellion, he was found guilty of rebellion, sedition, and conspiracy in what was a total kangaroo court.
On December 30, 1896, at just 35 years old, Dr. Jose Rizal was executed by firing squad at Bagumbayan. But even in his final moments, he maintained his agency. When the shots rang out, his final act of defiance was to deliberately twist his body to face the rising sun. He flat out refused to fall backward like a traitor.
That one single death served as the point of no return for the Spanish Empire in Asia. It enraged the populace, it fueled the revolution, and eventually it birthed the first republic in Asia. Rizal was an intellectual architect forged by the steamship, the Suez Canal, and a massive global exchange of ideas. Which leaves us with this final, vital question to ponder. If a single mind, expanded by the world, can literally dismantle an empire, what ideas are we failing to cross-pollinate today? Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it sparked your curiosity to look at history through a much wider lens.